was on par with the ambient values. That was half a tree number 4. This is a residential well used by the National Water Commission, and the other wells had 2 or 3 times ambient levels. So there's a definite deviation from what pristine water is. This is an indication of a little early deterioration in the aquifer, but this is just for sulfate values. And this isn't bad because we don't have any values that exceeded or even met the drinking water standard. So while there's a little bit of a deviation, we're still viable for potable water use. Moving on, we'd have sulfate values for irrigation wells. And again, we find a well that is performing with pristine sulfate values. That well is half a tree number 2, which is an NIC well used for irrigation purposes. And the other wells having elevated sulfate values, deviating from what pristine water is. And now we can clearly see that there's an influence on the sulfate values within the aquifer. Moving on from sulfates to nitrate values, we have the nitrate values for the residential wells within the aquifer protection zone. And again, we have our standards. First, for nitrates, we have wells that were not only pristine, but better than pristine. We have Congreve part number 4, government part number 2, half a tree number 4. However, we do have our outliers. We have the Grange Lane well, as well as the Cookson well, where elevated nitrate values were recognized. These nitrate values fluctuated seasonally for all wells, so we can recognize that there is a definite influence on nitrate values based on the activities, the anthropogenic activities on the surface. We look at nitrate values for irrigation wells. Irrigation wells performed less with irrigation wells were less lucky than the residential wells when it comes to nitrate values. We have nitrate values that were elevated 2, 3, 4 times what ambient is, especially during the wet season between August, September, and October of 2017. We had spikes right across the board for nitrate values, but then they decreased going toward the dry periods. So now we recognize that there is definitely an influence in nitrate values, especially for irrigation wells. Even though we do have some form of deterioration, the nitrate values for irrigation wells were still within the drinking water standard. Hence, if these wells were necessarily needed to be shifted from agricultural use to domestic use, they'd still be a viable source. Next, we will have the values for sodium. We had sulfates as well as nitrate values before. Now those would be indications of farming activity. Now we'll be looking into possible saline intrusion. And the parameter we're looking at is sodium. Sodium values for residential wells within the aquifer protection zone experience a seasonal fluctuation as well. They fluctuate between the wet and dry seasons during the Jamaica's bimodal rainwater seasonality. We had elevated sodium levels during August, September, and October of 2017. Then we moved into February and March. For 2018, all those values were decreased down to ambient level. Then February 2018, they were decreased down to below ambient level, then elevated again. So we recognize that as surface runoff occurs and as surface runoff occurs, wells weren't being operated as such. Moving into sodium values for irrigation wells within the aquifer protection zone, we find that there's a much drastic influence on sodium values for irrigation wells. And this is probably because wells were being overpumped when precipitation was not its highest. When precipitation is low, farmers would need more of a demand from the wells to provide irrigation for their crops. Hence, a major influx with sodium levels for irrigation wells, which is primarily one of the indicators for saline intrusion. Again, you recognize the seasonality of the sodium values with the high peaks and the low troughs. Looking into the chloride values for residential wells within the aquifer protection zone, just to remind you that the red dotted line is what is the drinking water standard recognized for the island. The green dotted line is for WHO's drinking water standard, and the blue dotted line is pristine ambient water. We recognize that none of the wells with residential purpose met the ambient pristine drinking water value. All wells performed above drinking water, above ambient, above pristine. So now we recognize that there's a shift from pristine into definite deterioration, or early deterioration of the aquifer. Note though that there is still none of the wells actually met or exceeded the drinking water standard. Now we see the difference between the residential and irrigation wells. These are chloride values for irrigation wells within the APZ, and we find that not only did the wells exceeded ambient levels, one of them actually came up to the WHO's standard for drinking water. That well would be Cookson number 4. Luckily, we do not use that well for residential purposes, only for irrigation. Again, we'll see the seasonality of the data with the high peaks and the troughs extending throughout the monitoring period. So there's a definite influence on the aquifer in terms of chloride and sodium. Looking into the conductivity values, we find that a lot of the wells for residential purposes, the conductivity was above ambient, but not doubling. So ambient is at 600 microsiemens per centimeter, and the highest value was 900. And an increased conductivity is actually an indicator of saline intrusion, because saline water conducts electricity way better than fresh, distilled, pure water. Here we'll see the conductivity for irrigation wells. And the irrigation wells were far more drastically affected conductivity-wise versus the residential wells. We have one well performing within ambient standard, and that well was the Half-a-Tree number 2. This Half-a-Tree number 2 well performed well for the majority of the standards. Looking into the direct influence of surface runoff, we look at the total dissolved solids. Total dissolved solids, again, would introduce solutes into the aquifer, your potassium, your magnesium, your calcium, your carbons and hydrocarbons. And we'll see a definite difference between residential and irrigation wells. The irrigation wells being more heavily influencing TDS than the residential wells. Into the groundwater status, we're looking at how groundwater elevation fluctuated throughout the aquifer protection zone over the monitoring period. The first well to look at is the most northern well, Phoenix Park number 1. This well, the data for this well expands from May 2006 to present. The beautiful thing about this data is that you can get a chronological feel of the water levels throughout the aquifer protection zone. You can, if you pay attention to 2013, 2014, and 2015, when Jamaica was experiencing a drought at the time, groundwater elevation dipped, and then we came back to our normalcy 2017, 2018. Now, looking at the trend of groundwater elevation in this area, we find a 2-meter dip from 2.5 meters to 0.5 meters over the monitoring period. And that is definitely a large amount of water to have been displaced over time. We'll be now looking at groundwater elevation for the most southern well during the APZ. This well is Salt Pond number 3, Great Salt Pond 7. This well is located within the agriculture belt of the APZ, you would have experienced flood irrigation from the 1980s as when sugar was king. And flood irrigation would have been a great recharge method for the aquifer protection zone. Now that irrigation method is no longer being employed, we find that there is another 2-meter decrease from 1986 to present in groundwater elevation. And to give you some perspective, we mentioned earlier that the aquifer protection zone is only approximately 30 square kilometers of land, and we have a 2-meter dip in the available fresh groundwater resource. I'm 6'9", that's roughly 2.2 meters. So imagine 6 feet 9 inches of water over a 30 square kilometer expanse. Then you get some perspective of how much water is being displaced out of the aquifer. Now we're looking into land use, and land use will give us an idea of how much surface area is reduced or increased within the APZ. And the surface area would help us to understand the rate of recharge. That's the rate at which water is replenishing the aquifer. If you look at the land use map for 2001, the orange denotes plantation or agricultural use, while the pink denotes built up or urban areas. The pink area to the northwest or to the left would have been Spanish Town, and the pink areas to the right was Portmore. The Portmore urban sprawl and Spanish Town urban sprawl is encroaching further and further onto the aquifer protection zone. As you can recognize the difference between 2001 and 2013. There's a reduction in mangroves, there's a reduction in broadleaf forestry, and there's a definite reduction in the plantation or the agricultural land between 2001 and 2013. This reduction in those land use would have negatively affected recharge for the lower Rio Cobre alluvium aquifer. There's less area for the replenishing of the groundwater reserves. We'll look over on the overall threats to the lower Rio Cobre. As mentioned before, we have overpumping. Wells were being excessively pumped when precipitation levels were low to meet the demand for agricultural use. They have reduced recharge as we recognize that land use is changing from the agricultural, from the plantation, to the urban sprawl, to the more industrial uses. Because of overpumping, we have saline intrusion where the saline freshwater interface is increasing steadily throughout the aquifer itself. And we have anthropogenic activity, we have the farming activity, we have surface runoff from urban sprawl, definitely negatively affecting the aquifer itself. If you look to the right, that's actually me trying to flush a line to get raw water sample, and our assistant, Mr. Cleveland Taylor. So the summary of results. The wells are in early deterioration, as majority of the wells did not meet the ambient pristine water standard. But however, the wells are still viable for potable use. So it's not too late. Wells are being overpumped while groundwater recharge is being reduced. And those two activities will definitely cause saline intrusion. So those two activities would definitely need to be addressed. The baseline water quality has deviated away from ambient, as I mentioned earlier. And the aquifer is heavily influenced by farming activities. We mentioned earlier that pesticide testing was done, and we actually had one positive test for pesticides. The pesticide in question was terbicarb. So we know that farming activity does negatively affect the lower Rio Cobre alluvium aquifer. Moving on to our recommendations. We recommend increased water monitoring regimes, not only the ones that are currently in place, but to step it up in order to ensure that we know any instance where contamination might enter the aquifer itself. We also recommend educational campaigns to stakeholders who use the aquifer itself, the farmers, the industrial activity people, everyone who has a stake, residents of Portmore, everyone who has a stake within the aquifer. We also recommend reducing overpumping activity, reducing overpumping habits, re-educating operators into how they negatively affect the aquifer. We also recommend expanding the aquifer protection zone because it doesn't exist within a bubble. We know that the Portmore metropolitan area and the Spanish Town City Center definitely negatively affect the aquifer itself, and convert it into a water quality control zone in keeping in part with Section 39 of the Water Resources Act, where a water quality control zone can be delineated from ministry. And here concludes my presentation on the vulnerability of the Lower Rio Cobre aquifer.
I have one comment to add in terms of the impacts of climate change and precipitation change, which will also be very important in the recharge of the aquifer and its sustainability. That needs to be kept in mind also. But thank you again, Mr. Wellington, and that concludes our report.
All right, so we want to thank Desmond and Jeffrey for all that information. It was quite valuable. So what is important now is that you get the chance to ask your questions, and of course, they will have the answers. Am I correct? Yes, they will have the answers. All right, so I'm going to also invite Mr. Peter Clark, our Managing Director, who will also join us because he as well got the answers that you need. All right, so Mr. Peter Clark will join us, and you can type your questions, and also we give you the opportunity to ask your questions on video as well. Thank you for joining us on Zoom, Facebook, and YouTube, and thank you for your time, and we do appreciate it. All right, so here we have everyone with us, and now it's your chance to ask your questions so that we ensure that we deliver all the communication to you today. I'm a moderator, Alric McKenzie. I don't have all the answers, but they do. All right, so I will hand over to Mr. Peter Clark in the meantime, and then we will have, just a second, let me look out for the questions, Mr. Peter. All right, so let me ask the question. Now, I'm hearing from Abigail McIntosh. Now, Abigail says that she would like to know about the recommendations about the aquifer recharge. Aquifer recharge, right? Are there any plans to do artificial recharge in the zone? Who'd like to take that on?
Well, artificial recharge is always a method that can replenish, rejuvenate, and maintain aquifers. In a nearby aquifer, there is an established artificial recharge facility in the limestone aquifer. That actually will be a part of the overall solution for water needs for development within the APZ. Also, it is our stipulation that in terms of development in the APZ, that there will be artificial recharge or forced recharge, in that there will be, for instance, retention ponds and retention ponds, swales, and other water holding features that will encourage recharge to the aquifer of surface runoff that would otherwise be going to the sea. So while there may not be an established facility, there will be methods that will introduce recharge to the aquifer.
Technology has allowed us to move more sustainably as we further develop urban areas, and we recommend that developers look into new technologies to help recharge in this area. Look into stuff like permeable concrete, which is a viable option to allow for recharge through percolation into the aquifer below.
Additionally, Additionally, one source that could be considered is the reuse of treated effluent in terms of the Soberry plant, which currently has discharges into the Rio Cobre. If the effluent is treated to a high enough level, it can be used also as a source of artificial recharge. And that reuse of effluent, once treated properly, can be used to recharge the aquifer and also reduce the overall water demand.
All right, so I want to thank you, Abigail, for that question, and we hope that we give you the answers that you're looking for, the answer that you're looking for. Alison Pierce, I want everyone to know that Alison Pierce said it's congratulations on study well done. Thank you, Alison. All right, hearing from Jackson, that's Garth Jackson. He says, can you confirm the limit of the alluvium aquifer and also the boundaries of the study?
The boundaries were, as previously stated by Mr. Wellington in the presentation, looking at the boundaries were set at the time for the extent of the alluvium aquifer as it was mapped at that time. 2004. The expanded mapping, as you saw on the map for the hydrostrat, has expanded what the alluvium aquifer is, but the APZ itself is still within that zone that was declared back in 2004. And so the study area focused on that study, the study focused on that area and the wells within that particular area. Part of the recommendation of the study is to expand the zone and to formalize it, as we said, into our actual water quality control zone, which would then encompass the entire map alluvium aquifer as it is currently known. And as research and more quantification happens, then the bounded zone will be changed, so to speak, to fit that map boundary of the alluvium aquifer. But so that's for the future use. But the current use was based on the boundaries established back in 2004, as that's what was that was what was decided, and decided at the time.
All right, thank you so very much, Mr. Marshall. Now we are now hearing from Juliet Shim. Juliet wants to know, is there a plan for the rollout of a program based on the recommendations, and what timelines are we looking for? Anyone like to take that on?
In terms of monitoring and improved monitoring and increased monitoring, we are in the process right now of acquiring the equipment that will be needed, and we've got a lot of the training already. So in terms of monitoring, I would say that rollout has commenced. The other aspects will depend on the rate of development and also the type of development.
All right, thank you, Juliet. We hope that we satisfied you with that answer. If not, you can ask for more clarity. For Natalie, Natalie wants us to elaborate on the care zone area.
That's what.
Okay, well, the care zone area means that we now recognize that development will be taking place, and based on that, we have put in stipulations that would make the clear zone that would help to protect the aquifer. Among the things that we would then stipulate, or we have stipulated, are the implementation of an effective solid waste management plan, that no final effluent will be disposed of on site anywhere within the APZ. As Mr. Marshall had said, grey water reuse program, not only to introduce water for aquifer recharge from Soberry, but even the grey water that is then produced within the area, that is so treated and handled that it can also be a part of maintaining the aquifer. The enacting of restrictive covenants with regards to I would say commercial activity within the area. We had said the matter of water retaining features that would enhance the aquifer sustainability, the matter of permeable stormwater treatment and storage systems. We have to identify all the likely causes of pollution. So there are a myriad of stipulations that we have already put forward, and those are a part of what will guide the overall
development that will be taking place. For instance, there are wells within the area, and we've implemented buffer zones around these wells so that you cannot build up close to the wells, you cannot do any commercial or any kind of activity in particular regions around the wells because we recognize their importance and their vulnerability. Settlers, unregularized now, will have to move and so on. So there are quite a few.
All right, so Mr. Clark, this one is for you again. Who will be responsible for the master plan for sustainable drainage systems that you just described?
The master plan for the overall, for any development that is going to take place there is being developed by others. Our remit is to answer the questions of provisioning of water for whatever needs that come up. So those will be a part, those master plans will be developed in conjunction with the greater developers of the area, the National Works Agency, and all of those players that will be involved with making sure that drains are in place to restrict flooding for the developments.
All right, so Nathaniel wants to know if this data is available by asking this question: what was the methodology followed to get the depth of each well? Was it the difference of the top of the water well reading minus the bottom, or was the depth calculated relating to the water table depth?
Thank you so much. And luckily, the WRA has all the data necessary to calculate the depth to groundwater elevation above mean sea level. We use sea level as a datum, as a point of a 0 point of reference. We also have the elevation of each well, and measuring from the point of entrance or the well itself and bottom of the well at elevation to the depth of the water interface itself, we're able to then calculate the elevation of the groundwater above sea level.
Additionally, in addition to what Desmond said, I do want to take the time here to make a plug for our web map database, which has our entire catalog of groundwater data and streamflow data. All of our hydrological data is available on this website for free. If you go to our website, that's www.wra.gov.jm, and go to hydrologic database, you'll be able to see our continual record of hydrological data, including the groundwater level data for all our monitoring wells across the island, also including the APZ. So you can get our data there also.
Here we have a question from TJ Islander. He says, are there different water quality standards for alluvium aquifers compared to limestone aquifers?
No, the water quality standards of guidelines are there for identifying the particular purpose or use of the water. So the standards or the guidelines are saying that the water should reach these standards or these guidelines to be used for this particular purpose, whether it be irrigation, whether it be drinking, whether it be domestic or whether it be ambient. So the source of the water, whether it's coming from a limestone aquifer or an alluvium aquifer, it's only, that doesn't matter as much as saying the quality of the water, does it meet the standard to serve that purpose for which you want to abstract and use that water for.
Great. Now hearing from Ruth, are the proposals for the development of the original SCJ lands for housing and urban infrastructure expansion for Portmore still going ahead in light of this study? And what would the water quality zone designation have on these proposals?
Well, the matter of development of the lands for anything and the decisions taken are those decisions made by others. The rate of those decisions, the rate of implementation also is being determined by others. So we have nothing really to say on that. With regards to the matter of the water quality zone designation and its impact, yes, there would be an impact because based on the stipulations that we have regarding whatever is to be done in the area, then those stipulations have to be adhered to. It is imperative that they are adhered to, and having done that adherence, then there is then the confidence that whatever that development is, or what it eventually becomes, it will be sustainable.
Great, thank you so very much, Mr. Clark. Janila Williams asks, do the current boundaries include a buffer area?
No.
Okay. No, Janil, I can answer that. I have that knowledge, Janil. The answer is no. Garth, regarding artificial aquifer recharge, can you comment on the importance or the impact of suitable engineered recharge facility versus a simple retention pond on the success of the recharge performance?
For sure, there is a big difference between an engineered artificial recharge facility and, for instance, retention and detention and swales. The fact is that the engineered facility will have direct introduction of the recharge water to the aquifer. There will then be, because it's a facility, there will be determined injection points. And those would then have a more direct injection of the water to the aquifer. Notwithstanding that, all the aquifers that we do have, they are not engineered artificially recharged aquifers all across the island. They are all dependent on surface water making its way into the aquifer, and God has been good in arranging for that to happen for these millennia. And the fact is that the detention ponds, swales, and the other structures, while they, to some extent, there's some engineering. There's some engineering behind them, and as a result, they will also help to replenish and rejuvenate the aquifer.
All right, so here we have a question from Richard. We might have tackled this earlier, but maybe we can define it just a little more. Richard says the Bernard Lodge master plan falls within this APZ. Now, the Bernard Lodge master plan also promotes further development in the APZ. How does these recommendations affect what is outlined in their plan?
Well, what the recommendations would affect them in that they would have to do the development within particular parameters, within protective parameters. It is not our concern if it costs them a little more for that to happen. Our concern is that they do happen. So the fact is that if there is any Bernard Lodge development that's going to take place, it has to take place under a particular remit.
Thank you. Mr. Fernandez says, what is the difference between APZ and the WQPZ? He says that we can realize that activities outside the boundaries can influence WQ within the WQPZ. It's a question.
Thank you very much. Yes, we are aware that activities outside of the boundaries can impact the water quality within the APZ in that regard. The difference between the APZ and the water quality protection zone is that the APZ was formed on an act of cabinet, while the water quality control zone that we would propose is what is as designated in the Water Resources Act, as Mr. Willington stated. So we would follow the steps there to kind of formalize it some more, give it a bit more, I wouldn't say backing, but to give it some more structure and to formalize it that this is actually a declared water quality control zone that is having a bit more backative, so to speak, in making sure that the water quality is protected. So it's not just a cabinet decision, but something that's formalized, gazetted, and built into law in that regard. And then that will also expand the study into sort of what else can be impacting the quality, what for things from outside, with the runoff coming from outside the APZ coming down, there could be inter-aquifer transfer from the limestone to the alluvium. Various impacts are there, all those can be considered. But that's the main difference, that the water quality control zone would be coming from what is allowed for within the Water Resources Act of 1995.
All right, so Mr. Herbert Thomas wants us to know that we're doing a great job. But he has a question for us. He says that he wants to know about the the impact of the Portmore drain on the declining groundwater levels? Is it of any significance?
Yes. Thank you for the question, Mr. Thomas. We are aware of the existence of the Portmore drain, and that based on its elevation, it does drain some of the aquifer. This has been brought to the attention of the higher ministry, and it has been, and they have in turn been bringing it to the attention of the National Works Agency, who have the remit for that drain. I cannot say what the actual plans are for would we call it mitigation of the draining of the aquifer through the Portmore drain. But the fact is, we are aware and we are pursuing the matter of bringing it to the attention of anybody who is of consequence whenever we speak about it, to see that it can be rectified in some time soon.
Just another question. Are there water treatment methods available to increase the quality of domestic water affected by saline intrusions? And are these employed by the NWC? Anybody like to take it on?
Those are two separate questions. There are technologies available to treat water from almost any quality to potable quality. Usually those will include like desalination methods, etc., which may be cost and energy intensive, but those methods do exist. As far as I know, the NWC at this time doesn't employ them in that region, but then to be clear on that, you would have to ask the NWC to provide feedback on same in terms of what technologies they use for water treatment in that capacity.
A question from SCJ Holdings. Will there be irrigation water available for agriculture in the Bernard Lodge South?
Yes.
Yes. I know the answer. SCJ Holdings, here's my brilliant answer, yes. Now from Michael, the decline in the water table in 1986 to present indicates abstraction exceeding recharge. What is being done to halt this trend?
That's a very, very important and good question. The abstraction, we have implemented the WRE, the volume-based fee, in an attempt to help to reduce the abstraction that is being utilized, so in terms of incentivizing our abstractors to take the license of the amount of water that they actually require, as opposed to how much they would necessarily want. So an abstractor might have had 1,000 cubic meters licensed for their license, and then they're only using 500 cubic meters, and so the VBF would be there, so they'll be charged on the VBF on the 1,000 that they've licensed, and so they've been motivated to reduce it to 500. So that VBF has been implemented to incentivize the reduction in abstraction rates. In addition, there is currently a moratorium on new abstractions in the entire Rio Cobre basin. So not just the lower Rio Cobre alluvial aquifer, but also the lower Rio Cobre limestone and the upper Rio Cobre limestone as well. This means that there are no new abstractions allowed. Persons who have their historical abstractions that are currently not in use, they wouldn't be allowed to abstract more than that particular usage. So for example, if a well had been historically licensed to abstract 500 cubic meters per day, and it hasn't been used in the past 10 years, but they want to bring it back into usage now, they would not be allowed to exceed that 500 cubic meters that they had been licensed with in the past, and they would not be able to drill any new wells to get more water in that regard. We will be implementing further research to see how best this can be further encouraged to be reduced. But the methods that we encourage also in terms of the more efficient use of water for both for irrigation and domestic usages, more recharge and reuse of wastewater to kind of cut down on the use of new water. All of these are steps that would be needed to be taken to help reduce abstraction and increase recharge by encouraging a more efficient use of water and a more focused use of recharging the aquifer.
From Gerald John, how would the extent of the buffer zone around the wells be determined?
Thank you, Gerald. The extent is being determined using international best practices. So for the purposes, 100-meter radius around each well will have that buffer zone, and that is for the well point protection. And separate and apart from that, and at the 25-meter interior radius, that will be fenced and padlocked. That's our recommendation for fencing and padlocking to further protect the well point.
From SCJ wants to know which wells will be used for agriculture on the Bernard Lodge South.
I don't think that we can say at this time what will be the wells that will be used. The SCJ themselves do have wells, working wells in parts of the APZ, and we're sure that they would want to maintain those wells for agricultural purposes. So we cannot say which well, whether well AB or well 15 or 16, but for sure agricultural activity will be supported and would be from wells.
From Lisa, in light of climate change, are we identifying suitable recharge points, especially to capture storm water runoff? Example, to facilitate usage during dry period.
We are, in the sense that those designers, if you have it, the planners will be utilizing the most suitable places that could be used for the development of the swales, the detention ponds, etc. Those recharge points are, of course, a recharge. That also would involve looking at the drain, for example, but this would be a multi-stakeholder approach. So it wouldn't just be for the double array to pick a point, but it will be for all stakeholders to come together and say, how best can we do the forward planning to ensure that the recharge that is needed is properly captured from stormwater runoff, reuse of effluent, and then what's the most efficient way to engineer and fix and solve that problem. So those are going to be considered and identified going forward in a multi-stakeholder approach.
All right. From Juliet. Juliet wants us to know that we're really doing a good job, and but let's move quickly to protect the aquifer and prevent further damage. All right. So we all can keep our jobs. We are doing good. All right. Now, will the NWA be funding upgrades to the Portmore drain due to road expansion in the Dunby Holden area? We're not able to answer that question, SCJ Holdings. Possibly the NWA can maybe provide some information. Well, thank you for asking. For Ruth, what would the WRA's recommendation for appropriate land use activities on the APZ be? How does this differ from the development proposed and existing?
As we said earlier, the matter of land use is the remit of the planners and developers of the country. The fact is that whatever is put there, whatever use the land is being made of, it is our responsibility to provide, to the best of our capability, the solution that would then support that use. So that actual decision is not our decision, but we do support whatever it is that has to be done there, whether it is agricultural or whether it is residential or it becomes a commercial area, or if it stands alone and nothing happens on it. Whatever happens, we have to provide whatever solution or assist with the solution for what then would then make the development viable and sustainable.
All right, so Mr. Peter Clark, Managing Director, is a part of our panel, is a panelist today. We have Mr. Wellington, an assistant hydrologist. We have Mr. Marshall, who's chief hydrologist. We have no more questions. I trust that we really and truly did a good job, including myself. I was able to provide some answers as the hydrologist as well. so I think by Monday I should be able to start at the WRA. All right, we want to thank you so very much for joining us on Zoom, on YouTube, and Facebook. We will just have a little recap of what was discussed here today. We're going to hear from Mr. Wellington. Mr. Wellington just going to do us a little summary so that everybody can feel quite okay, and especially based on some of the questions and the concerns that were asked just a while ago, and maybe Mr. Wellington, some things might have popped up, right? So I'll allow Mr. Wellington to give a little recap, and we should be able to, and while he's doing that, if you have another question, you can plug that in quickly. I will give you a little time to get some answers, all right?
Just to recap, we are aware of the state of the water quality within the lower Rio Cobre alluvium aquifer. We are aware that there is some early deterioration. Some standards have some water quality parameters have deviated from what ambient pristine water for the island is recognized. But we are hopeful and we are confident that though there is some deviation, we can still restore the water quality to what it was before. We recognize that though there is some early deterioration, all the wells are still viable, still viable for potable use, still viable for domestic use, and if needs be, can be called upon. We are also aware of overpumping within the aquifer, as well as a reduce in recharge within the aquifer. And we're making steps, as Mr. Marshall and Mr. Clark had mentioned before, that we're making steps to address the overpumping issues and to best address the recharge issues, implementing designs to ensure that even though development might take place or will take place, development will not take place in a bubble. It is not isolated. We're taking a holistic approach to development in the area, taking into consideration the health of the lower Rio Cobre alluvium aquifer.
All right, so we have a quick question here from Lancelot, right? Who took our suggestion earlier. He says, where will the wastewater from the Bernard Lodge master plan developments be directed? Do we have an answer for that?
Well, the master plan is still it's still a stage where details of that sort are not available. We do know that nearby there is the major Sober water treatment plant. We also recognize that a part of our stipulation will be that treated effluent be used as much as possible for helping with aquifer recharge. Another of our stipulations is that the entire facility will be sewered so that the wastewater will be captured and it can then be conveyed to a point where it can be suitably treated before it is discharged into the environment. And as we said, the stipulations will be that a lot of it will be discharged in a way that it will help to keep the aquifer alive.
All right, and here we have a quick plug-in from Janelle, who says, was fecal coliform concentrations assessed? And if not, why was that so? Also, are there background levels for the water quality data for the wells assessed? Was sea level rise considered in the depth of samples? All right, so who'd like to take on the fecal coliform?
Fecal coliform concentration was not assessed for the APZ report. For farming activity, we mostly focused on sulfate and nitrate levels within the APZ. Fecal coliform presence would have been sporadic because based on the thickness of the alluvium in different areas, plus the concentration of agricultural activity, whether it was a huge piggery or a small chicken coop. So we find that the best way to assess agricultural influence is to look at nitrate and sulfate values within the APZ. And that's why we used nitrate and sulfate as an indicator of farming activity and not fecal coliform.
So the other question also about the background data. We have historical data that was considered, but it was also a bit sporadic. So one of the main purposes for this study was to establish a new baseline. And so the aim is that going forward, we're able to use these results as the kind of standard to test how well we're doing in terms of improving the water quality or observing whether it's deteriorating. Sea level rise also is considered. I mean, saline intrusion can be caused from either sea level rise or overpumping, but as you know, sea level rise is a more long-term event. So we would have to have a more long-term monitoring program to assess what impact sea level rise versus overpumping may have on increasing salinity levels. But this is something that we have considered.
Also to remember that sea level is an average. So we looked at the elevation of groundwater as against the average sea level.
While we're waiting on any more questions, I would like to thank everybody who have logged on and who have joined us for this webinar. I must acknowledge that I saw that our two former managing directors whose chair I'm now sitting in have logged on, Mr. Basil Fernandez and Mr. Herbert Thomas, and they asked pertinent and salient questions. I hope that we answered you sufficiently, and I hope that we made you proud. I also noticed that Mr. Garth Jackson, Vice President, Chief Engineer of the National Water Commission, was on. Our former colleague, who is now on the verge of being a consultant, probably to us, Alison Pierce, who had worked on a part of this in the early stages of this investigation, also logged on. And there are quite a few others. We saw Ruth, from SCJ, from Michael White. Again, he was former staff here and now operating independently and successfully, I must add.
Shim from NIC.
From NIC. Juliet, yes, Juliet Shim. Juliet. Thank you for logging on, Juliet.
Yeah,
and Leon Ropo. Right. Thank you so much. NEPA was on, of course, and there are a few independent persons as well. Thank you all.
All right, so we're not escaping just yet. There's Lesworth. Since we're using this study as a baseline, he says it's unfortunate that the fecal coliform or total coliform wasn't measured. Hope it's done and documented at the next opportunity, next time. All right, Lesworth, I'm sure we will do further developments. All right, I'm not sure who logged on today who's proud of me, but we really appreciate everyone joining us today for our webinar. I'm sure there will be more coming your way for sure. So thank you, Lancelot. It was very informative. Thank you, Mr. Peter Clark. Thank you, Mr. Wellington, and thank you, Mr. Marshall. Right. So I just want to remind you that the purpose of this webinar today was to share with you our study on the aquifer, which is an important source of water for drinking and irrigation for the majority of the Portmore municipality that is built on top of the aquifer. So hence it was important to carry out this study for the quality and the quantity of the water in this area. So hope that we truly satisfied you today. So thank you so much for joining us on Zoom, on Facebook, and on YouTube. And if you have further questions, I'm sure you can send us an email. You can connect with us on Facebook, and you can connect with us on our website as well. And you can connect through our email address that is listed on our website at the Water Resources Authority. Thank you so very much. Alison, I think Alison has something. Okay, Alison is saying she's looking forward to open dialogue about the developments in the APZ. Alison, we will have more. Will this study be available to the general public? Will it?
Yes.
Yes, Lancelot, we will. It will be on our website. It will be on our website. How soon? Right, by Monday. By Monday, it will be on our website as well. So you can even connect with people as well to look at the well, Monday is a holiday as well. So you might want to take a break on Monday. And Tuesday you can look at it as well. Don't be me. Don't work on the holiday. Lesworth has there's a quick question. What is the forecasted impact of the proposed demand from Bernard Lodge development plan if it goes ahead? Anyone question that? What is the forecasted impact of the proposed demand from Bernard Lodge development plan if it goes ahead?
The Bernard Lodge development plan, from my recollection, the water for same was be sourced from the limestone aquifer via Kankara, I believe was the selected distributor. And they had they showed the license capacity for staying from the limestone aquifer. So at this stage, there would not be any impact of the development of Bernal Lodge development on the alluvium aquifer, since they're not taking any water from there in that regard. So that's the answer to that particular question, that if it goes ahead. Well, those questions should be directed towards the Bernal Lodge Development Authority in that regard, but the water will be coming from, so far planned to come from Kankara using the limestone aquifer, like alluvium aquifer.
All right, so we have no more questions. So I think that's it. That might be it for today. Mr. Peter Clark, you still want to sing for us?
No. It's nobody's birthday.
It's nobody's birthday. All right, so thank you so very much for sharing with us, and we do appreciate your company. So remember, if you need further information, you can check out when this report is made public on our website, possibly by Tuesday. Monday is a holiday, take some rest, all right? And you can always contact our office for any further information as well. Thank you so very much for joining us, and do take care, enjoy your weekend. And for all of us here at the WRA, take good care.